Well, here we are, and it seems possibly highly likely that the TikTok ban will happen, and so I'm using it as an opportunity to try to start posting daily here on YouTube, which is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time. I've done it in the past, and I really want to find just really two platforms at a minimum to show up on with original content, being TikTok and YouTube. So in case the ban kicks in, this will be the place to find me, and I'll be posting every day, some longer form and also some shorts. And my goal is to also post, obviously if TikTok continues, I will continue to post there. So in honor of that, I really wanted to make a few videos that really tie into the core of what I've been talking about a lot, which is first of all, attachment and attachment trauma and relationships and childhood, as those things really tie into often what kind of sets the groundwork for our complex trauma and our relationships. And alongside that, this piece of, I believe, hypervigilance, which is very common for us, especially for those of us who had to spend our childhoods in some chronic state of fight or flight for a million different reasons, from at the core, unpredictable, emotionally unsafe parenting to all types of wounding. But the bottom line is that we learn that even if things were kind of calm sometimes, we could always expect the storm to follow. And so in our bodies, we are still living in that and playing that out in our relationships with ourselves and the rest of the world. And so I thought we would I'm going to remake a few of the longer, the 3-minute videos I've made on TikTok with this core issue around what I often call silent Cptsd, and really also chronic toxic hypervigilance. So today's video is really about that, and then I'm going to make some more videos talking about some things that you can do about it. So I've really called it secret hypervigilance because what I think is happening is that just like the silent complex trauma symptoms, they have truly become part of our personality. It's just who we are. We think that's who we are, but a lot of what we do and how we respond is actually a trauma response to our own caregiving environments and our childhoods. Now remember, you can have complex trauma, and hypervigilance can come out of other relationships that aren't just parenting ones. So it could be from bullying, siblings, an adult, narcissistic relationship. Those kinds of chronic relational wounding patterns can really set us up. But I have found that if you found yourself, let's say, in a narcissistic adult relationship, for most of the people I've worked with, when we go back and look at their childhoods, they were already primed to unconsciously choose these partners based on their own childhood. Now, it may have been that their parents were chaotic, so they tried to choose somebody who seemed very calm and in control, and that can be a narcissist, for example, at the beginning. But then the eggshell nature of pleasing a narcissist, even if they never raise their voice to you, right? You never feel good enough, it's critical, condescending, controlling, victim-y, whatever it is, gaslighting, is that you learn to live in that fight or flight. So there really is a wide spectrum, don't forget, of what complex trauma can look like. So the first thing is, because you're always scanning for threat, you walk around sort of low-key, annoyed, irritated, stressed, but you don't really say anything to anybody because you feel like you don't have what seems like a good enough reason. You just feel like your gears are just kind of like grinding a lot of the time. And you might mask that with medications, with numbing, with substances, with binge watching shows, whatever it is. But inside there's like this angsty kind of like anxiety feeling at all times, because at the core you're scanning for threat, because everybody and everything can be a threat. And why is that? That is because if you had parents who were unpredictable and eggshell, excuse me, that's because you basically learn that, like I said, the storm will come. So you can't fully relax knowing that, yeah, maybe the sea is calm now, but I know the storm is coming. So I have to get my life jacket on and my boat ready and things like that. So that can play out in like low-key irritation, which can make you easily stressed out, easily triggered by people, carry kind of low-key grudges or resentments, but not really say anything. It's just this constant kind of energy. The next one is you always think you're in trouble and other people are mad at you, right? And so that's because you've been overreading, looking for the storm your whole life, and it always went back to you, which is often why we have a lot of shame, because I think deep inside we internalize, when we are too little to know the difference, that it can't be my caregivers that are bad, because if that was the case, then I will never be safe. So it has to be something wrong with me. So we overread, overthink, overmake meaning, overinterpret, And it always comes back to what we did wrong or how we're in trouble or we're not good enough. And the story really always kind of becomes something about us and our less than ism, things like that. As I said earlier, we often numb through addiction, shopping, whatever it is, but we're doing these things enough to function well. So in this kind of dynamic, it's not holding us back from living our lives or paying our bills or whatever, keeping a job for many people. It might, but for many people I've found, it's actually that we just, we kind of secretly and feel ashamed of these things, but we do a lot of these self-regulating behaviors to try to find a way to get our nervous system for just a little while in a state of calm because it spends so much time in that chronic hypervigilance. The next thing is we are trained to be outside-in orientators. And so that is the very common dynamic where you learn to be a compulsive caretaker, a people pleaser, focus on the needs of the caregiver, because if the parent is like this, right, and unpredictable, you want to know that so that you know what to do with your own body. And so that ends up meaning that you often neglect your own self, your self-care, your own boundaries, things like that. And oftentimes it helps you prevent yourself from feeling that deep well of pain. And it also keeps you busy and so exhausted and depleted that you don't have time to really deal with what's happening for you. And then of course that can play out in chronic mental and physical health issues as well. We have a lot of high highs and low lows in terms of anxiety and avoidance. And this is kind of like disorganized attachment, but I feel like there's a whole separate area where it really is just this, it's not that we're necessarily chaotic and disorganized in a more classically really chaotic wounding state. It's that certain parts of people and parts of relationships and parts of their attachment trigger our anxiety or avoidance. So let's say I'm really hypervigilant and anxious. When I get a text message, I'm looking for meaning. How many emojis are there? Does that mean they like me? Or why aren't they responding? So I make meaning out of that, which many of us do. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you do it excessively, there's usually a reason for it. And then the flip side is when we get into relationships, oops, my daughter's texting me. If we get too far into a relationship where there's a risk of our own vulnerability, we can get avoidant and not really know it, but find reasons to kind of like put walls up or set boundaries or be busy. And so there can be these wide swings is the bottom line. And that's also about self-protecting, because if you think about, let's say the hypervigilance came from a parent who was really ragey, and you knew that when they came home, if they did certain things like put their shoes somewhere or just started yelling about the dishwasher or whatever it was, or were slamming cabinets or bang the garage door, that was like they were in a bad mood and they were going to unload on you. So the first thing you did was do your chores and stay busy and then go to your room. So what did you do? You went and stayed in your room alone the rest of the night to avoid that mood. But meanwhile, you're like stressed out the whole time. Like, are they going to come in here? What's going to happen? Because you already know what that looks like. So that's how that can play out. That, you see what I'm saying? That pattern in your adult life. You can also be a very strong isolator, and that goes back to what I'm saying about being in your room. Oftentimes, the only time you feel rested and quiet and manageable in your nervous system, which can still be often at that, the dial is always there. But for many of us, feeling alone and isolated feels like the safest, like no one can trigger me. And that can also look like a classic avoidant attachment dynamic where people will, find ways to kind of dissociate and lose themselves, and maladaptive daydreaming, that kind of like spacey auto-regulation. Is the same thing for us, whether we're watching something, reading something, doing something, scrolling. And the challenges I've seen for many people that have avoidant attachment that I've worked with, it's not that they had parents who were who were emotionally neglectful and never engaged around emotions and or just didn't provide a safe emotional environment. They also often left them alone, but also had extreme patterns of chaos and rage. And so for these people, they really have leaned into I have this bubble around myself and that's how I stay safe. So it's not necessarily just that there wasn't emotional conversations. It can also be a way to really get the body into a safe place, in my experience. So a lot of these are what it looks like when you're living with this toxic hypervigilance. And I'll talk more in other videos. I made a bunch of TikToks about this and I've posted them here on YouTube as well. But we want to look at how to recognize, identify our triggers, try to manage them, look at how we deal with our bodies. What can I do to help soothe myself, not to shame ourselves when we do need time alone and we're just need the world to go away for a while. I've talked about laying in my bed at night with the quiet of Netflix and my candles or TikTok, whatever it is, or reading, and how deeply soothing that can be, especially if you are, you add layers of introversion, let's say, people are exhausting, things like that. But the core, when you have a kind of chronic hypervigilance, is that the people that have been in your lives, human beings, are the trigger. And so that's why it's so hard to heal, and why, you want to work on it and understand that it becomes just like developing a yoga practice or mindfulness. It's a lifelong practice of managing your nervous system. You're not going to spend your entire childhood like this and wake up and never have it. I think that is completely, impossible for most people. But you can learn to live and set up your life in a way where you have more breaks, or you manage your nervous system in ways that prioritize taking care of yourself, which is often the number one most important thing. We've learned to neglect ourselves, our needs in our lives. And a lot of life is, obviously, you can't control your work environment in many ways for many people, but maybe you can take more breaks, or maybe you can ask to work more days at home, or maybe you can, I've struggled with often working through lunch, and I'd rather get off earlier. But not giving myself, my nervous system, a break doesn't always serve me. So it's like things like that, just rethinking how you set up your life can be really powerful. So please feel free to post in the comments your thoughts and experiences here. I thank you so much, as always, for being here, and I will plan on seeing you tomorrow. Take care, stay safe. Bye-bye.